Okay, well, ladies and gentlemen, we have a special guest this time around. He and I have been friends for over 20 years now. It's crazy to say that, but I think I first met him when I was 19 years old in Montana. One of the adventures we had, so to speak, is that I went to a theater school up in Montana, and one of the towards the end of the program, I had to write a full length play and then put it on. And I could ask different people to play different parts and things like that. And so I asked Garrett to be my lead, which was a character that was a combination of people. A lot of it was me because I was trying to write a story from life, and so a lot of it was me, but it was also some other people. And I kind of forgotten about this till Garrett brought this up recently that I made him, for those of you in the acting world or who know a little bit about acting, I wrote a monologue, which can be hard to do, a monologue that he recited to the audience. That was like at least a full page, which
Yeah,
if you know about acting and stuff, that's a long time.
yeah,
How long was it? Probably like 7 minutes or something of you just talking by yourself.
yeah, yeah, and the important distinction you need to make is that we're not talking about like a screenplay written as in the format of a screenplay, right? Where it's just if you look at the block of text in a screenplay when there's dialogue, is it's literally just down the middle of the page. This was like full left to right, many pages
One
of
inch
dialogue.
margin.
Yeah, and yeah, it was a 3 or 4 minutes, something like that, and
At least
I
I
did
want to say.
memorize it. Yeah, I did
Yeah,
memorize
that's
it,
crazy.
except
You did
for
a great job.
this one time we did this performance. I don't think it was the first one, or we had a bunch of our friends in the audience, and I was, going through the scene, and my mind as an actor, your mind goes somewhere else for just a split second and gets you off what you were doing. And I just tell you, man, that was some of the worst time in my life. Like I went white because I completely forgot where I was. I had to
Didn't
leave
you like
stage. I
yeah,
exit stage, grab the paper, got back on stage, started over, and then ended up not even needing the I went and grabbed everyone. I could tell because I wasn't looking directly at people, but I could tell from my peripheral vision that people were squirming in their seats. Yeah, it was bad.
Hello, and welcome to Oh for the Love of Art, where, well, do you like art? Do you like talking about art? Join us. We'd love to have you.
yeah.
Shows you how good of a guy I was, I guess.
That was fun times, though. I've been thinking about that lately. My nephew turned 18, and he, like, traveled abroad some, and he's going off to college soon, and I was just thinking, like, that was the years 18 to 21 or so were such a great time, uh, volatile time, like, where you're trying to figure stuff out, and it's kinda scary, and you're doing new things, but it was also very fun, especially having people like you by my side. That was fun times.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, I will let my guest introduce himself and what his medium is or what he considers his medium to be.
I'm Garrett Amerson. And well, when I was practicing, this is going to be one of the most controversial interviews you've ever had. When I was practicing, I was a screenwriter. So I was writing and practicing to eventually, hopefully, be working as a paid screenwriter in Hollywood or whatever would that would be, but essentially writing movies.
So, all right, screenwriting. Let's back up a little bit. And just as an artist in general, like, were you into art from the beginning? Like, were you, as a little kid, were you an artsy kid? Did you do any writing, any drawing? What was your childhood like?
Yeah, a lot actually. I would say that my childhood could be described as the kid who was always drawing. The kid that was always, at least to a certain age. I think part of that had a lot to do with my growing up experience. It had a lot to do with being introverted and not having a lot of friends. So that was a way for me to express myself. And yeah, so I think it was something that I just poured my time into was drawing all sorts of stuff. And towards the later part of my drawing years, when I started to get to the point where I wasn't as interested anymore. I was drawing superheroes and, I would take a comic book and try to reproduce it, not by tracing it, but by looking at it and, being inspired by the artistry and drawing that way.
Yeah. So who was your favorite superhero? At least back then.
Man, that's tough. I was kind of torn between Batman and Superman because
Mm.
they were the two superheroes that I had a subscription to.
You actually had a subscription.
Yeah, yeah, I had a subscription to DC Comics and Superman and
Nice.
Batman for a while.
That's pretty awesome.
Yeah, so I spent a lot of time reading the I guess I should say reading the comic books, more looking at the pictures, but being inspired by that, by the drawing.
Do you have any of those still, by the way?
Yeah, actually, I've kept all of my old comic books. I have a comic book box, and they make specific boxes for this where it fits the exact size of a comic. And yeah, I have all of them. I think I have about 200 or 300 comics from when I was a kid.
Wow, that's pretty cool. I don't think I knew that before.
Good
Okay,
one.
so you grew up drawing, especially with the superheroes. Connect the dots for us then about how that took you eventually to screenwriting.
Well, that's a really long journey because it wasn't just, from that to screenwriting. It's a little more complex than that. But if I were to break it up, shine a light on some of those pieces of my story, it would be probably falling in love with photography in high school, towards the tail end of high school. So for a long time, I wasn't very artistic. I tried to spend a lot of my time just trying to survive in school. I didn't excel in school. My grades weren't very good. I had behavioral issues as a kid. And so art wasn't really my focus. My focus was surviving, trying to be popular, that
Sure.
the race that we all tried to, or many of us tried to do in school, and just keep my head above water. But as I was finishing high school or getting towards that place, I realized that I had this desire for photography. I just something about it called to me. And I spent a couple of years, taking pictures. I bought myself my first DSLR, which back then they didn't have any digital ones. I'm talking about. So I graduated in 2001. I'm an old guy. And so back then it was a 35 millimeter DSLR. I think it was a Nikon. Or was it a Nikon? No, I'm not sure what it was, but so I just started taking pictures and I just loved that. It was such an awesome way to get back into that artistic side of me, which seemed so prevalent as a young kid. And so from there, I think it was connecting how pictures can tell a story, how you can put pictures together and put together some sort of a meaning. I'm racking my brain trying to think of what's the connective tissue that got me into screenwriting, but I think it was realizing that the writer is the one who has he's he, the writer is the one who has the control over the story, right? Because the writer is God of his own world. He or she is writing, they're making up, they're creating, right? There's a blank canvas and you get to create, you get to do whatever you want, right?
So you're talking about movies now. So what made you so you were into photography, you were into the comic books and drawing. What drew you over? Did you just see that, hey, photography and all these things tell a story like movies do? What kind of drew you into the movie scene?
Well, not that this is going to be a very strange view or different view. I think that movies are something that we all grow up with, and we all have favorite movies that we grew up with. And so it's just connecting that experience that so many of us have as a kid is I love this movie and I love this movie. And I think that there's something to the process of creating that goes hand in hand with movies, right? And since I already had that desire to create with pictures, I think it started to turn into let's start exploring writing in the context of creating original stories. And hey, I already love movies, so let's mash these together.
Sure. Why not?
They seem to go hand in hand. So it was like taking that love of and desire of movies and photography, which again, those things are connected. And then, hey, I'm interested in writing. Let's explore what this looks like, you know, to create a story for film.
Huh. So in that, kind of along that same vein, movies, story, what are some of your favorite stories? Like, especially say from those childhood years growing up, what were those ones that really drew you into that world and made you want to do this?
Yeah. Oh man, there's so many. For the longest time, my favorite movie was E.T., the extraterrestrial.
Yeah,
Which I don't know. It was a very dramatic movie. It's honestly not a kid's movie, really, but because the main character is a kid, it kind of brings you into the world through a kid's eyes. And so that movie had a lot of special meaning for myself. And also, I think it had a special meaning for my mom as well, because I remember watching it with her when I was a young kid, and this was probably years after my mom's divorce. And so the story takes place kind of in a similar situation, right? So the main character, Elliot, the boy, his family's going through this divorce. And so there was a lot of shared emotion there. And I think it was an easy way to step into the story, but then also connect, sort of a mundane existence with something amazing, right? This alien
sure.
comes. And so that definitely had and it still does, a close place in my heart. Back to the Future was also another one as a
Uh,
kid that it hit all of those high points of excitement, adventure, science fiction. Um, you know, it just hit on so many points. And so I think those are just a couple. Obviously, I have a huge list of ones, but I would come back to those ones time and time again because I could
yeah,
I could get something, I could feel something from those movies, and there was something
yeah,
about that, like, you can tell a story that moves people, it
yeah.
moves people to tears, it can get people to think, it can get people to consider their lives in a different light. I mean, it's amazing what they can do.
Yeah, I think that's true too, like, for those movies growing up that you said dramatic, but yeah, I think those are the ones that affect us the most, are those ones that make us feel so deeply and that we see ourselves in, like you said. Yeah, I can think of, like, in my life growing up, movie and book-wise, were like the Tom Sawyer and Huckleberry Finn stories. And it's not that I was like them necessarily. It was more like they had aspects to their personality that I really kinda wished that I was, like, that I really liked. Like, they seemed like they had a lot of fun. They went off and had adventures, and it seemed very fun, like a very fun story.
Right.
I kinda wished I could be like them, so I totally understand that. Well, I mean, that's what movies do, right? That's part of the magic of
Yeah,
movies is that it
yeah,
transports us, lets us play a different character for 2 hours to
yeah,
imagine ourselves in a different world, and that is, especially for a child, I think it's a magical thing. It's very cool.
absolutely. Yeah, and I think that
Alright.
there's so much like what you just described that we get from movies is especially with characters that we can relate to in movies is it and this is kind of a core foundation of why movies is such a different art form than so many others, right? Is that we're able to see similar problems from a different perspective. And that
Sure.
different perspective informs us about our own lives and how we're living our lives in the context of the story.
So true. Yeah. So, alright, photography to movies, and obviously you and I share this love of film and movies. That's what we've geeked out about a lot over for the years. Garrett and I would a lot of times it's basically all we would talk about after we'd parted ways and gone our different routes in life is we'd come back together to talk about movies, to watch them at the same time or watch a show at the same time and then talk about it afterwards.
Yeah.
And
Right.
then you decided to try to make a go of it and,
Yeah.
um, and become a screenwriter. So tell us a little bit about that. How did you segue into screenwriting?
Yeah, so I remember it was about right around the time that we had spent a lot of time together in that time of our life that I started to get more serious about it. And I remember I got a job with the company Verizon and was working with them. And I had this grand idea that I thought would be the thing that changed everything, for me. I figured that if I could make this happen, then I was going to make it. This was what I needed to do, and that was to go to film school. And so I saved up enough money and I was living with my dad at the time. And so I didn't have any bills. He paid all the bills. And so I was actually able to save up enough money to go to film school and, just buy it. Just go to, here's the money, whatever you want, here it is. So I had already kind of made a plan to move back to Washington because I was living in Montana at the time and move in with another friend, which Phil. And it was a dream, a dream of ours to live in an apartment someday, take a big bite out of a block of cheese. I think I told you that, right? Like it's the bachelor thing is to have like a block of cheese in the fridge. And anyway, and so we moved in together and we lived for a while together. And then, so I decided, okay, now was the time. And so I got an apartment in Seattle area and started going to Seattle Film Institute, which at the time was this dinky little institute with, I don't know, it was just a small little place with an editing bay of maybe like 10 or 15 computers. And it was just a small, cramped little place, maybe 15 students in each class, It was such a rudimentary and experience. But yeah, so essentially that's kind of where it started. So I went to film school. It was a 9-month program. And while the program didn't emphasize writing as much as it did production, I honed my focus, right? It was a time for me to hone my focus and realize this is what I want to do. This is where I feel I should be. This is what I think I should be doing. This is what I feel called to do. And
Sure.
so after I graduated film school, I missed out, unfortunately, on an opportunity. I had an internship to write with an established writer. This particular writer was going through, I believe it was cancer treatment at the time. And so he was very unavailable and unfortunately just didn't work out. So I ended up getting married the next year and essentially spending the next 10 years of my life working at that, developing original ideas for feature-length screenplays or movies, and also a television series idea. Anyway, the point is that's kind of where it all started and where I was for the next 10 or so years doing that.
So I know we probably don't want to get into every single aspect of the next 10 years, but kind of go over that a little bit, like, because that was a big chunk of time. And you weren't working for like a production house. You weren't working for anyone really. You were working for yourself and you were
Right.
working to break into this business. Kind of explain to our audience what that kind of looks like, at least how it looked like for you.
Yeah, sure. Well, yeah, you're right. It can look very different, and I'm probably not, I'm an outlier as far as what it looked like for me. My wife just got a job as a nurse, and so she took her first job in another state, and that's also where we got to spend some more time together because you lived in New Mexico at the time, and I still remember that phone call of, "Hey, we're moving to Las Cruces," right? And that's where we live.
Yeah, that was so weird that you guys didn't even realize that that's the town that I lived in, but you were just like, "Hey, we're moving to this town in New
Yeah.
Mexico, Las Cruces," and I was like, "That's where we live."
Yeah.
Yeah, that was
Yeah.
cool.
So I had to quit my job with Verizon because I was figuring that I was going to leave myself open for possibilities in the writing realm. And so I quit my job with Verizon, which I'd been with for almost 10 years, and we moved to New Mexico. My wife worked night shifts as a nurse to get her, career started, and I didn't work. Like I wasn't bringing money in, and my wife was gracious enough to allow me to pursue this dream of mine, which was to write stories. But I think, right, the dream and the reality are two completely different things. We dream about doing a lot of things, but when we realize how much work it is, that's where we really figure out who we are and are we really devoted to the craft. I'm not saying I wasn't devoted to the craft because I did pursue it for that 10 years, but what it looked like for me specifically was basically being myself as a writer, figuring out what genre did I want to write in? What were the types of movies that I wanted to write? Did I want to write action movies? Did I want to write dramas? Did I want to write horror movies? And so I dabbled with quite a few different genres. I think drama is kind of where I naturally tended to go because I as a very I don't know, I had a lot of drama in my past. And I think I was wanting to explore that in some way, which I think is pretty normal for someone who's starting out. And in fact, I remember in film school, a lot of the student projects mirrored, there was quite a bit of darkness in them because I think we're all going through that time of life, right, where we're trying to figure out our lives and what did all this mean? And, right, how can I incorporate it into a story?
Sure.
So, anyway, I explored the genres for a little bit and just kind of went through the weeds with it. I didn't really have a lot of formal training in it. So, I just started studying and reading a lot of books on writing, different viewpoints, different perspectives, how to write a story, and just kind of started hacking away at it, spending 5, 6 hours a day outlining. You'd be surprised at how much, as a writer, how much time you spend, right, outlining for an idea and not actually writing. But once you get the outline ironed out, then you start writing, you just realize it's not this process that we think it is, right? It's not this, hey, I just, you know, just did a draft, in a night, or did a draft in a week. And you do hear those weird stories. And there are some really brilliant writers who've been able to do things like that. But it was just, it was a hard process, and there's a lot of learning. There's a lot of things you can take away from that process, I think, of getting down and actually putting pen to paper.
Yeah. Yeah, that's definitely where the rubber meets the road, and I remember being around you during this time, and ladies and gentlemen, Garrett is if there's anyone that was going to quit their job and just try their hand at this, Garrett was probably the person for it because he wasn't just, like, laying around in his own filth playing video games and be like, "I'll write a little bit," and he writes for half an hour. Garrett is very disciplined, and I remember, like, he had an office. He set up his office. He had up his whiteboard. He had, yeah, like he said, he worked on outlines. He really tried. Like, he studied this. He did the things that he knew to do. Let's go back for a second, though, just and lightly cover because I'm sure a lot of our audience probably doesn't study this. But if you've been to film school or study film much, you know kind of the differences between the different genres. So if you can spend just a little time talking about what the differences are between, like, say, writing a drama as opposed to a comedy, as opposed to a horror. Like, what are the pros and cons to those different types of films?
That's a good question. It's really, in there. You can approach any of those genres the same way, in the sense that you can start with, and this is generally how most screenwriters approach this, is they want to start with a big idea, right? So it doesn't matter what genre you're working with. If you don't have a compelling idea, a good hook, right? It's going to flop. I mean, not in the sense of,
Can you just real quick give us an example of what a hook is or what a big idea is?
yeah. So a big idea is, or a hook is something that is, as I've heard some people say it, it's going to get butts in seats. So as a writer, you need to be able to see the two different sides of the business, right? You need to see the business side of the business, and you need to be able to see the art side of the business, right? So you actually have to be well versed in both. And all good writers are. They understand why they would need to write a certain type of movie because they realize that it's commercially viable, is a word you'll hear often thrown around when it comes to screenwriting, which just means that you get butts and seats. You get people to the theater. If no one comes to the theater to watch it, then it's not going to work, right?
Mhm.
So we take a movie like E.T., as I gave an example earlier, right? Well, what's the hook of that movie, right? It's an alien visiting the Earth, but not just an alien visiting the Earth. He's visiting a small boy, right? And so there's this connection. So with the business idea, right, is the high concept or the big idea. An alien visits Earth and joins a kid in his house, lives in a house without his parents knowing, right? So then that's got a compelling idea, but now there's also an emotional resonance to it, right? We have the boy sharing his life with the alien and learning what it's like to be on Earth, and so there's layers, I think, with any genre. So
Mhm.
that's with the drama specifically, but like I said, that same idea is applied to all of the different genres. So horror, drama, action, adventure, it doesn't matter. You kind of have to approach it with that understanding.
So in other words, you want to have an idea, an overarching, like, what is this movie about? You wanna have a big idea of it's about this, and that needs to be catchy, or when an alien comes to Earth, but it also the good movies have those layers, like, not only does an alien come to Earth, but he befriends this boy, and they go through what it's like to live life, really, and that's what gives it that meatiness too.
Right. Yeah, exactly. The other pieces to that is just understanding the genre, right? So if you're going to write a drama, an action adventure, a horror, a thriller, know what those movies are like. Watch those movies, enjoy those movies. That's why generally speaking, you'll have people working in a certain genre because those are the genres they like as viewers. They like to watch those types of movies, right? So
Yeah.
if I don't watch horror movies, me taking a stab at a horror movie is probably going to be something that I saw one time long ago, right? It's going to be a
Yeah.
repeat of something that I've seen because that's all I know. You need to know the
Like,
genre enough. Yeah.
I was thinking about Taylor Sheridan. I think he's a pretty big household name. Like most people know who he is. He created stuff like
Hmm.
Yellowstone, wrote Sicario, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah. No, correct.
Did I think he's had a hand in Landman and a lot of different really great television mainly, but a lot of great stuff. But those are all dramas. Like if you heard that Taylor Sheridan wrote a comedy with Will Ferrell, you would probably be like, wait, what?
Right. Right. Yeah.
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 So I totally get that. That makes sense.
Yeah.
So your favorite genre is drama. You think it has to do with just, well, who you are probably and the way that you think and like you said, like your past too. I know there's got to be people that just love comedy too, and they just want to be joking around all of the time and that's their thing.
Yeah.
So yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say that drama it's not just flat drama, right? Not to say that in my some of my top lists that I don't just have just what would be known as a drama, but I have a lot of lists on my movies that they take place in different genres like science fiction, action adventure, comedy, but they all have really interesting and deep dramatic cores to them, right? So there's something, when I say drama, I mean they have some complex ideas and there's a depth to it, right?
Hmm.
So,
They're exploring like a deeper issue about our humanity or a person's life and why they are who they are is something I would probably say.
yeah, and in interesting settings, different settings, right? Not just a kid. I mean, and this is a movie. I mean, I'm describing lots of movies right now, but a life of a kid who goes to high school, you know? I mean, unless you're an established writer, pitching that is not going to get you anywhere, right? You have to have a very specific vision that people already understand. Hey, this guy knows what he's doing. We should probably listen to what he has to say. That in of itself doesn't sound very interesting, right? But then if you put the setting on the moon in a, post-apocalyptic type of a setting, right? You're playing with some elements that might elevate just a bland kid goes to high school story, right?
Sure. Yeah. Okay. So we've talked about a lot of your favorite films and like what constitutes a little bit of what constitutes good writing. What are in your mind some of the ones that are kind of the worst films out there, or some of the ones that are pretty bad?
Yeah, it's funny. I actually haven't talked about my some of my top favorite films. Do you want me to go over that first?
Yeah. Let's start the positive route first. What are your some of your favorite ones?
Oh yeah. So a good resource for anyone who doesn't know, and maybe there's some others out there that I'm not aware of, but a really good resource that I use online it's a website called letterboxd.com. It's d.com. And it is a website that allows you to curate lists of films for whatever you want, right? So I have all sorts of lists. I have a list like my favorite comedies, my favorite action movies, my top 100 films, things like that. I even have the worst films I've ever seen. So for this is what I use to help me remember, right? When I have a list of 100 films, I'm not going to remember that. So I need a way to track all that information. So my top favorite films, my let's just start with the top 10. How's that? How about I do my top 10 and you do your top 10?
Gosh. Okay. Go.
All right, so let's start with number 10. We'll go down to 1. So number 10 is the movie Better Off Dead, which is a
Okay.
80s comedy with John Cusack. If you haven't seen that, I'd recommend it. Number 9 is The Matrix. I don't think it needs any introduction. If you haven't seen The Matrix, go see it. Number 8 is Moneyball, which is a baseball film.
All right.
It's an exceptional film. Even if you don't like baseball, it's incredible.
That was written by um
Aaron Sorkin.
yeah. Right. Very good writer.
Yeah. And number 7 is Ferris Bueller's Day Off, right? Great film.
Classic.
Yep, classic. Number 6 is Witness.
Okay.
Harrison Ford.
Good old Harrison Ford.
A very young Lucas Haas, who's still an actor. He's all grown up now.
Mhm.
Yeah, great film. Number 5, Castaway.
Okay. Good old Tom Hanks.
Yep. Number 4 is Terminator 2. Judgment Day. I saw this as a little kid. Definitely shouldn't have necessarily seen it as a little kid, but it was just one of the best movies at the time that I'd ever seen as a kid. And then as I grew up, I rewatched it and was like, no, this is a really good film. And it has a lot of depth. It's not just a surface level action film. There's a lot of interesting concepts, interesting ideas, and a really deep story. Number 3 is E.T., as I mentioned. Number 2 is Back to the Future. And number 1, this spot has actually changed a little bit because, like I mentioned, E.T. used to be my favorite film of all time. It is now Dead Poets Society.
So good.
So I saw that about 20 years ago or so. And honestly, I had one of the most emotional reactions to that film.
Mhm.
Going in blind, not knowing anything about the film, but I just had one of the most emotional reactions or experiences with that film that I realized that it hit something deep inside of me. Yeah, it was just a really poignant experience.
And that came out I didn't realize it was that old. It's 1989. I
Yeah.
didn't realize that. Wow, that's crazy. Okay. Yeah, I think I saw it for the first time around that same time, about maybe we even saw it together. I don't know. Yeah, that one's so good. And I feel like I don't know. I'm sure that different people have different reasons why he is their favorite or whatever. But I feel like the ones that are like really people's favorites that like they've had since childhood or whatever, they're ones that do touch them at that emotional level, that
Yeah,
just meet them where they're at and just like cut to their core.
sure.
Because going to my 10, it's not going to be in order because I haven't really thought about this in order. Plus, I think it's hard to say.
Okay.
But for me, one of those, well, probably Dead Poets is in the top 10. But also, I would say Forrest Gump. Forrest Gump, I really connect. I saw probably as a preteen or something around 11. Yeah, it came out in 94, if I'm not mistaken, when I was 10. But it was really, it's an emotional film as well. Fiction, but like centers around a lot of historical moments and whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
And it resonated with me, this guy that I think because I struggle with depression, or I did and still do, and with the OCD, like this anxiety, there was this guy that, and plus as like a teenager, you're constantly critiquing yourself and you're like, am I handsome enough? Am I good looking
Mm-hmm.
enough? Am I strong enough? Am I all these things? Like you're
Yeah.
constantly, and this guy, Forrest Gump, like he didn't think about those things, and he just lived life, and he did like such amazing things and got to have all these experiences and adventures. And of course it's fiction, but it just spoke to me as a kid growing up so much. So that's one of those that to me resonates, kind of like Dead Poets Society. Another one,
Mm,
Goodwill Hunting. Goodwill
sure.
Hunting is very good and kind of is on that same type of plane.
Mhm.
And let's see, a little bit on the lighter side. When I was like a teenager, 14 years old, I remember going to the movie theater with my cousin. He was visiting, my cousin Joel, and we saw Men in Black, the first one,
Right. Yeah.
which I don't know if it would be on most people's top 10, but at the time, like it was my jam. I love When I was a teenager, I was really fascinated with like law enforcement. And well, of course, at that time, The X-Files was popular, and I watched The
Sure.
X-Files with my father. And so I just love the idea of like this espionage slash secret society. but they're really cool and they fight aliens. And I don't know, it just clicked with me as a teenager. Jurassic Park, man, Jurassic Park has to be in the top 10. That was such a great film, and when you see it, you're just like, oh,
Yeah,
man, you're in awe. Like that movie, I didn't see it in theaters. I saw it with my
man,
cousin Mark
you
at my
missed out, man.
grandpa's house on VHS, and when it was over, I was like, "Wait, that movie was how long?" It did not seem like it was that long at all. It was just such an engrossing, awesome film at the time, and still is.
Yeah, I saw it as a kid in the theater, and that was one of the most unique movie experiences that I ever had. So I
I'm
would
sure.
say if that ever plays again at the theater and you haven't seen the theater, it's a must watch. It's just yeah,
Well, and the thing for that film too was that at its time, 1994, I believe, once more, there's a lot
that
of great
sounds
films
right.
came out in 1994. It was groundbreaking. Like
It
he
was.
used animatronics, I think, and some CGI, I want to say.
Yeah,
But animatronics was a big amount, and it just was like nothing else that anyone had ever seen on the screen, and especially on the big screen. So yeah, hats off to the good old Spielberg there.
right.
But yeah, that's gotta be one of them. Gosh, there's so many. I don't know.
Yeah, it's hard.
But I think yeah, I think that's all we have time for right now. That's a good at least
Sure.
5, so
Sure. Yeah.
but that's fun. It's fun going down those memory lanes of all these great films that you've watched throughout our lives.
Yeah. Yeah. There's just too many to list and not enough time and also not enough interest, right, to listen to someone drone on for 2 hours
Like,
about all their
yeah.
favorite movies. Yeah.
Oh my
Great.
gosh, you like Jurassic Park? You and everyone
Yeah.
else in the world, great.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
So, favorite movies inspiring you to do this and inspiring you to do story. Why explain a little bit about why you chose screenwriting as opposed to say directing? Because when I went to film school, I thought, okay, I love film,
Mhm.
I love movies. So in order to really affect the world, and we all think we're gonna change the world, which we do in our own way. But anyway, in order to really change the world, I think I need to direct because then you really have a creative hold on
Mhm.
you can have your say in everything. So I went kind of for directing, or I thought I wanted to. So why did you choose screenwriting over the other ones? Sound design, set design, directing, photography, what?
Yeah. No, that's a great question. I did dabble in film school, as I said, as I mentioned, it was more focused on production, which I understand the value of that, right? It's hands-on work. You need to understand how stuff works on a film set, right? So that you can get a
Sure.
job on a film set. So I did actually a lot of boom mic stuff in film school because it wasn't a job that many people wanted to do, which is understandable. Everyone wants to be a director. That you're gonna if you have any interest at all going to film school, which I honestly these days, and this is kind of off to the side discussion, but I would say honestly, unless you have a very particular intent of what you want to get out of film school, you can probably do it yourself nowadays with the tools that we all have available to us. And there's plenty of stories, right, of people not going to film school and making a name for themselves, right? Just on YouTube, Instagram, on any place that you can make short films and get those out. Okay, rant aside. I chose writing because I feel like it's the first place where anything happens. You don't start with a director. It starts with a
Right.
story. If you don't have a story, you don't have a director. And a good director understands a good story. So if you want to be a good director, you actually have to, in a way, be a writer because you need to understand why does a story impact someone. It's like in music, right? You have swells, you have crescendos because you're trying to convey certain emotions in through your music. Well, the same thing in a story is you're developing not just this one monotonous scene after scene after scene, right? But we have waves of stuff happening and the director needs to understand all of those pieces, how all those pieces fit together. And for a director to do that, he actually needs to understand story first. So I think that's the big misconception that a lot of students go in with is, well, I want to be a director. There's nothing wrong with that, but look at all the good directors, right? Study them. What do? They understand story, right? Story is a natural extension of directing. So I think I just decided that I was going to invest my time in building the world from the ground up. And if then that led to directing, then great. But I was, kind of the first boot on the ground, so to speak, with choosing to be a writer.
I want to push back a little bit on what you said a little bit ago. How it sounds like you're saying you basically don't think that people need to go to film school necessarily. I agree to that to a point. As with a lot of art, I feel like you can learn a lot on your own. Or with today, the way things are on the internet, of course, you can learn through that stuff and through books. But do you think that's necessarily true to a point in that, well, there's going to be all types of listeners out there. There's going to be those that really maybe love film and know a little bit about what it takes to get into it. But I want to speak to those people that don't know that much about how the pie gets baked, what actually goes into making a film. Because it can seem to a lot of kids that like, oh, I love movies, they're awesome. I want to do that. And that's great. And actually, I oscillate back and forth on this because I think you need to keep that. A lot of the times you need to just do something that you're interested. If you think you want to do it, try it. Go do it. I don't want to discourage that at all. But on the other hand, I think film school can be helpful in that if you don't really know, like it will get your feet wet and kind of lead you by the hand and actually show you, okay, what does it actually take to shoot a scene? Like it's not as glamorous as a lot of people might think. It takes a lot of time, energy, effort, a lot of organization.
Right.
What goes into creating a score? What goes into writing a screenplay? What goes into all to even acting? Like a lot of people, I think people who are great actors make it look easy. And a lot of us think, oh, I could
Yeah.
do that probably.
That's right.
Yeah, there's so much that goes into these things. So I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I think our middle ground where we can meet in the middle is that film school is definitely not for everybody, right? It's for
Right.
people who, and I'm not trying to generalize everyone who's interested in it, but it's for people who do want maybe that they don't have the resources available to them, right? Maybe they don't have the money to have all the equipment or to do all the processes that are needed. I would argue that it's actually less expensive to go the route of figure it out yourself because there's lots of resources online that you can take advantage of. And it gives you a more holistic viewpoint of the process because you have your hands on everything, right? But I would say that film school does it in a more safe way. It welcomes you in more. Right. Whereas if you're just left to your own devices, you might be more willing to quit. Right. Because there's no one leading you by the hand. There's no one. It's the school of hard knocks as far as you're going to have to figure it out by yourself. I mean, there's amazing free resources online. So I do believe that it is a place for some people to go. But, I think if you're going to talk about film school, you need to talk about both sides of it. Film school is incredibly expensive, incredibly
Uh-huh.
expensive.
Yeah.
When I went to film school, and this was back in 2008, it was $20,000,
Yeah.
probably almost doubled that price.
And that
You
was
know,
for how long? For how long? For the whole
that
school?
wasn't that wasn't even a year program. That was like a 9 or 10-month program.
That's right. You said 9 months. Yeah.
You take a bigger school, right? Take any film school in California, for instance. I'm sure it's 100 plus grand to do something like that, right? So it's definitely has its drawbacks. There's a place for it. But for those who don't have a lot of money, are interested in film, there's just plenty of great resources online. YouTube is an amazing resource, right? You can learn just about anything these days. And equipment is becoming cheaper. You don't need the top of the line camera, right, to shoot on. In fact, many people are shooting on their phones these days because they shoot 4K video, 60 frames a second. The resources are there for kids, adults, whoever, to start the hobby now and learn as you go, right? So I think one of
No,
the things
that's
with film,
true.
yeah, I think one of the things with film school also that is a pro is depending on where you go, it does get your foot in the door. It gets you to bump shoulders with other professionals because a lot of obvious professionals teach in these schools. So you get to learn from some of the best people at doing whatever job. You also get to network with other people. You probably have more opportunities for internships, things like that. So there are some pros in that regard.
Gosh, yeah, it's such a like there's so many pros and cons to both worlds. Like I keep on thinking about it as you're talking. And I guess I think personally for me as an artist, I oscillate back towards the side of what you were saying, how you don't need to have film school necessarily. I'm not talking bad about film school at all. Like you said, that's for some people, but I think I gravitate more towards the side of you don't need it necessarily. As far as, yeah, you might not know everything that goes into these things, like what goes into a shoot and whatnot, but you will learn because you're doing it. And you might
Right.
not be, and at first you might be doing it in a very scaled down, rudimentary way. But that doesn't matter, I don't think, as much as in most things, your passion and what if you really wanna do it, no matter what art form, I think, you just doing it. That's the most
Right.
important thing. You keeping that
100%.
passion and you really trying. And if you have that passion, you're going to try. And that's what's
Yeah.
gonna make the difference. But on the other on the other hand, like you said, especially if you wanna go the Hollywood route and whatnot, it does who you know does help, and meeting the right people does help.
Yeah, it's
But then
definitely
again,
valuable.
if you meet the right people and you don't have anything that's worthwhile to say or to show, then they're gonna know that too, and it's not really gonna go anywhere. Yeah, there's so many ways of looking at it, but I think I fall to the side of, like you said, you don't really have to have it. What's more important is to drive.
Yeah, yeah, and honestly, like you said, the most important thing is you getting hands-on experience, right? And that's kind of true with all sorts of disciplines, whether it's art or whatever, is do you know how to make a movie, right? And if you make a movie, doesn't matter how good or bad you think it is, you're going to learn so much that it's going to inform the next one that you do. And you're going to improve on all those things. So all of these people who are making movies, celebrated directors, right? They all started doing this when they had way
Mhm,
less technology, right? They were
mhm,
shooting on Super 8 cameras and having to go develop the film, right? And their films were terrible, but that was their like everybody, it's the stepping stone to getting to understand how you make a story for the screen.
absolutely. Yeah, I think that's way more important than anything else is your love for it and just doing it. 'Cause
Yeah.
that's obviously been some of my downfall all along the way. Not downfall, but I needed to just do things more. Like, and I recommend that to anyone out there who's thinking about doing these things, who's like, "Well, I think I might wanna go to film school, or I think I might wanna try to get into the movie business." Do it. Shoot it. Like Garrett said, iPhones these days have incredible cameras, and you can edit them even right there on your phone.
On your
And
phone,
start
right?
small. Don't try to do a full-length film right away. Not at
Right.
all. Do a 3-second film, or I don't know, 30-second film, a 5-minute film. Do something small.
Right.
One scene. Do something because if you do a 3-second scene, 30-second scene, or
Mhm.
whatever, successfully, that's going to encourage you to do more. And then you'll learn more and you'll keep going. I mean, this may be profound and a no duh, but by all means, I recommend to anyone out there that's thinking about this stuff, just try it and start small. Because if you I mean, I don't wanna necessarily discourage the next person from doing the next Goodwill Hunting, but I think if we shoot too high sometimes with these lofty ideas, might get discouraged by the enormity of it when we should just start out with bite-sized chunks, do a
Yeah.
little bit at a time. But anyway,
Right.
I go off on a tangent there.
It's all right.
So, alright, so let's get back to you. Okay, so you're working at screenwriting. You've done a show or two. You've done a feature length or two. This is all spec work, right? Like you're doing all of this on your own. And how did you try to become noticed? How did you try to get your work out there?
At the time, there mainly the only avenue was competitions. And I'm sure that this is still probably a pretty prevalent highway to travel, which is that you write a feature length screenplay, which is a movie, like a 90-minute movie, or a TV pilot, which is the first episode of an original TV idea, and send that into a film competition and see how it goes, really. Um, obviously, just like film schools, there's notable film competitions, writing competitions, and so and of course, those ones are more expensive, but the flip side is if you place in, the top 5% or the top 3% is you will generally get contacted by, an agent or someone who's interested in your idea, right? And so that's kind of what the goal that I was shooting for was to get one of my screenplays into the hands of someone who could actually do something with it, right? Who saw that I could bring something to the table as a writer.
And how did that go?
To varying success. So, as you can imagine, with someone starting out not well, I don't remember all of the competitions that I submitted to. I submitted to a number of different competitions, and some I submitted to, like maybe a screenplay once a year to the same competition. But what I did notice is that over the years, I was getting better because my screenplays were moving up in the ranks, so to speak. Like, for instance, one of my and again, I don't really remember which one it was, but one of my screenplays made it into the semifinals of a competition, a decently known competition. So I think maybe that was as far as I made it in the competition. I don't think I ever made it to the
Was that
finals
for
or anything
a
like that.
was that for a feature length or what was that for?
I'm trying to remember. I honestly can't. I couldn't tell you for sure. It was either
I
for
remember one of yours, if I'm not mistaken, one of your more successful ones as far as getting noticed was, I think it was a short film about a sock or something. Do you remember that?
but a sock.
Yeah, like, wasn't it like a sock? Like, there's the old trope of that, like, you lose a sock in the
Yes.
dryer, and so you created this idea of, like, this I don't know if it was a monster that was eating these socks or a
Yeah.
sock that
Right.
did something, I forget.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wasn't it like a horror?
Yeah, so that was a short screenwriting competition that I entered into, which this particular competition is now a really big competition. I kind of got in on it when it first started up. I can't remember the name of it, but yeah, it was for short horror screenplays, and this was also horror was a new genre for me. There was, a number of horror films that I enjoyed growing up, and so that I could study. But yeah, it was based off that idea, like you said, of what happens to our socks, right? You pull them out of the dryer, and then when you're folding them, there's always tends to be these weird extras or outliers. And so yeah, I came up with this idea that it was these sock monsters that were taking him. Yeah, I think it made it to the quarterfinals in that particular year of that competition. But yeah, that was a fun little project to write.
Yeah, interesting, huh? And that's just it too, like, I feel like some of the things that we can pour our hearts into and spend so many hours on, those don't get as much traction as things that we're just like, "Oh, what about this?" Like, what if a sock like, what about these socks? I don't know. I
Yeah,
don't
no,
know
I mean
if you find that.
it's kind of as a writer, and I'm saying this because I'm assuming that some of the people listening to this are maybe interested in writing or write themselves, and so they kind of get it. Now, when I talk about this, they'll understand. Is you're looking for just interesting questions that you have, right? Things like that, right? You wouldn't even necessarily think that that would be anything worthy of an idea, but that's the thing. When you're scouring for new ideas or a fresh take on something, you have to consider those little things that come up, those little inspirations from time to time, right? And so
Yeah.
you really have to be open to allowing your brain to not reject or to not censor ideas coming in, right? I think that that's something that you've talked about on this podcast from time to time is how our natural sense, that side of our brain likes to censor creative ideas coming in sometimes, right? Like, oh, no, this is stupid. I shouldn't do this, or, right? And creativity lives in a place where it's not filtered, right? It lives in a place of allowing stuff in, allowing it to see where it goes.
Yeah, I think we have to have space to play, as, John Cleese said in his book. Yeah, we have to have space both physically and time-wise, and I think emotionally and everything, space to play, and that's where creativity, I think, lives and thrives best.
Right.
All right. So you were working at this, you got into some competitions, got it into like a quarterfinal, maybe a semifinal. What was your favorite genre to write in? Was it the drama?
No, drama is actually really hard drama, or really hard genre to write in. It's just very difficult, honestly. I found it easier to work in horror or maybe thriller or something like that because you're working with elevated levels of reality. Whereas with drama, you're usually playing with more realistic stories, right? In the
Sure.
sense that you're trying to elevate someone's life in an interesting way. And it's a lot harder than it sounds, right? It's not just about one sappy scene after another sappy scene. In fact, that's the killer of a drama, is people tend to
Right.
think that it's just that's what a drama is. It's just a bunch of sad scenes tied together, and that's absolutely not it.
Mhm.
There's a
I'm
lot of
thinking about
levity.
I'm thinking about, The Notebook, which is based on a book, and, like, just on surface level, if you thought about what it is, you would probably be like, "Yeah, that might be hard to make people interested for an hour and a half." But he did it in such a great way. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, so I think I kinda gravitated towards, those high concept ideas, trying to come up with the next speed, that type of thing where you're trying to think of something that's gonna, again, get butts in seats. Because part of that too is getting yourself excited about it, right? If you aren't excited about the idea, and this I guess is general advice, is don't write it. Get excited about something because you're gonna need fuel to get you through those long, hard days when you don't want to write at all or it sucks, You need some big idea that's anchoring everything else. So I would say, yeah, I was more drawn to thrillers, writing in that, at least towards the end of my writing journey, I would say.
And let's talk about that now. So you were going along, and now you're talking about an end. So walk us through that.
Yeah, that was in 2019, right before the pandemic, somewhere in there. Um, what can I say? So that screenplay that I was telling you about, the one called Pairs, about the sock monsters, that was one of the last screenplays that I wrote. I was working on a feature-length screenplay idea, which I don't remember what it is. I'm sure I have it tucked away in a hard drive somewhere. But I don't know. I was feeling a lot of resistance to doing it because I think it was motivated, sometimes motivated for the wrong reasons. One of those reasons is I need a paycheck, which isn't a wrong reason, I wouldn't say. It's just that after I had been doing this for about 10 years or so and going through the same thing as far as starting a project, starting an idea, going through the research, going through the blueprint phase, and then the writing, and then the critique of the writing. So I would frequently send my screenplay in to professional writer, editors, things like that, right? To pick it apart, basically tell it sucks in these areas. You need to fix it here, here, here. And I have plenty of writers read it as well and get their feedback. So when you do that process over and over and over for many years, it's hard. It's a very difficult place, right? Because you're writing from a place of you're pouring your heart out, right? You're pouring everything out onto the page. And the whole goal of this wasn't just for fun, right? It wasn't just about this is a side hobby that I'm doing, right? It was more about this is what I want to do. This is the career path that I'd like to take. And it doesn't seem to be panning out. And so at the very least, I need to start looking into doing something else while I'm doing it on the side, right?
Uh-huh.
And so I think it was during that time period where I was trying to figure out, okay, I need to be making some money. What am I going to do? That I realized that I just didn't have enough energy to do both things at once. I couldn't pursue screenwriting the way I wanted to and also have like a part-time job on the side. And so it kind of felt like it just came to a natural conclusion, as in it wasn't like I didn't just bawl my eyes out about it or anything like that. It just felt like it was done. That it had come to the end of its time. It didn't amount to what I had wanted it to, but it wasn't a failure in the sense that it wasn't that I didn't learn anything or that I didn't have skills that I still use to this day, right? And what I'm currently doing. And so, yeah, I guess that's kind of how it sort of ended.
So, yeah, you're saying you didn't like bawl your eyes out or anything. So it wasn't. It was more of just like a practical. Hey, A plus B. You know what? C just feels right. Like this is. It wasn't so much that I hate writing and you threw your computer out the window. Um, yeah, it was more of just a natural. Hey, this I'm at a different time in my life, and I think I need to make a change.
Yeah, it's kind of like, what the definition of insanity is, right? Which is doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result. Well, that's kind of what you do in art
Yeah,
because, right? You do the same thing over and over and you do expect sometimes different results. And that's also I think
or
where you need to ask the question, why are you doing it, right?
yeah, now that's exactly what I was going to talk about. Is like, yeah, I mean, even some of the greats have talked about on my other podcasts, like Van Gogh. Van Gogh died poor, as did a lot of artists, I think. And But that's just it. Like, I don't think the reason why they did it wasn't necessarily for the acclaim, for the money, for the success, quote unquote. They did it because it was something that was inside of them. I think that's what a lot of successful, quote unquote, artists have in general is no matter how successful they are monetarily, they want to do it because it's inside of them. And that's why, yeah, yeah, there's a lot to that because, like, say you, for instance, I still consider you an artist, even though you're not, quote unquote, practicing right now. And I myself, too, I haven't actually painted in a while, but I still consider myself a painter. I still consider myself an artist because I think it's something that's inside of us. I think it's something, it's a way that we look at the world. And, you're going to pick the pen up again another day, probably, or I'm going to pick up the paintbrush at another time. It may not be tomorrow, but it's still a part of us. And I think, yeah, that's just part of the journey is learning when to pick that paintbrush up and when to put it down and when it's okay to leave it there for a little bit and when, hey, I need to have the discipline to go pick that up every single day.
Yeah.
And you did that for a long time. You did that for 10 years or so where you picked that pen up every single day
Yeah.
and you made a real go of it.
Yeah.
You thought about segueing into novels, if I'm not mistaken, at one point, right? Like towards the end there?
I did. Yeah. Yeah. I think that was a part of me that was trying to find, at that point, I hadn't decided, obviously, right, that I was done. And so I was trying to decide if it was really just me moving into a different discipline or a different, type of writing. And I started developing an idea. And honestly, that's where a lot of ideas go to die, or as we like to say as writers, is in the development stage, because that's honestly probably about 75% of the work is the
Yeah.
development stage, right? Because it sets up everything. It sets up what the actual writing is going to be like. If you don't develop at all, well, you're going to spend all your development time writing a million drafts, to get it where you
So
want it.
kind of explain that to us then. Like, what exactly do you mean by development?
Development, I guess you could take it a lot of different ways because everyone's development process is going to be different. But what I mean by that specifically, I guess, is that it is a phase where you're coming up with the big ideas, right? So we talked about having a big idea, having a hook. This is also where you would develop your theme and develop your characters, right? So this is where the heavy lifting happens and figuring out what your story is about, right? Having all of that time put into figuring it out, right? Because you aren't just going to sit down and be able to
So
connect all those pieces organically.
in other words, it's kind of like you're making the bricks that are going to fall into place to build this wall.
Right.
That's
Yeah.
kind of a rudimentary, stupid way of saying it, but yeah, you're coming up, like you said, with the characters, who they are, where they're at, what the main ideas are, blah blah blah. Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So outlines and lots of outlines and
Flashcards everywhere, right?
well, yeah, lots of note cards. You're just having, it's kind of that 50,000 foot view of your story. You need to be able to see it objectively, to be able to see where its flaws are, what needs works before you start getting in. Because when you start writing, you lose a lot of that objectivity, right? You're just seeing things, you're trying to see things more subjective, and that has its place. So it's about getting all the heavy lifting done as much as possible before you start actually writing. Anyway, so yeah, in that process of developing the idea for a novel, it didn't pan out. It wasn't either inspired enough by the idea, or it was just the work itself was just already too much for me at the time to take on.
Yeah. Yeah. So what is, for someone that is thinking about getting into either screenwriting writing or novel writing or really any kind of writing, what kind of advice would you give them if you had to give them like one really big piece of advice that stands out?
Yeah, I think a lot of people might be listening to this and thinking, well, why should I listen to this guy? He didn't become a writer. He's not writing, so why would I listen to him, right? Well, that's a fair point. I would say, however, that 10 years of experience really gave me a lot of perspective that I didn't have back then, right? Looking back on it. And if I were to do things differently, it's kind of, this question could be said almost if you could do things differently, how would you do it? Right. And honestly, if I could really take something to heart, and what I would say to anyone who's interested in writing or who is already writing is, don't be afraid to make mistakes. In fact, make as many mistakes as you possibly can. And I don't say that lightheartedly. I say that seriously, as in it took me years to get to the point that I realized that I spent so much time censoring myself. That inner voice of, oh, this is not good. This is crap, And so I spent a lot of time performing, trying to meet my, internal standard instead of just writing, right? I spent so much time
Yeah.
in my head and not actually doing the thing that I wanted to do. So I would say, as an artist, as a writer, you need to get to a point where you realize that you're going to have good days. You're going to have days that, you're like, I like what I wrote. You're going to have days where you write stuff and say that wasn't good. Well, that's the whole part of the process. You can't get to the finished work and it just be a bunch of good days built on top of it, right? It's all mixed together and it's all a learning process. So be able to be okay with making the mistakes, because you're going to learn from the mistakes, and the mistakes are actually going to make you a better writer.
And sometimes those mistakes are gonna be happy mistakes too, like, it actually comes out better than you thought it ever could. But that's so
Yeah.
true, and that's such a good piece of advice because I know, like, even for my type of artwork too, if you think and think and think for so long about it, like, "Oh, I need to come up with a better idea or a good subject matter for my paintings or something, or maybe I need to change my style." If you just keep thinking and thinking and thinking, that's gonna paralyze you to in a way, like, you need to just go out and do
Yeah.
so much. Like you said, don't be afraid, just go out and do it. That's so good.
Yeah, and I think that it bears repeating, multiple times, not just saying this because it's a feel good quip, that you hear from time to time. And it's like, oh, okay, sure, whatever. Like, no, seriously, you need to be able to get to a point where you realize that you're not just going to be God's gift to writing, in your own mind. You're going to have to be able to work past those difficulties, because whether it's writing or painting or music, it doesn't matter, right? You're going to be met with those difficulties, and it's how you respond to those difficulties that's going to make you the type of artist that you are, right? So it's really just understanding the process and being okay with having those bad days occasionally, and just pressing through, just doing the work, just show up.
You are, if I'm not mistaken, forgive me if I'm making assumptions. You are one of those people that wants to make sure you're doing things right. You want to learn how to do something that you put in your mind to and do it right. And then I'm thinking about, what if there's someone that just like kind of just jumps in, like says, I want to try screenwriting or writing. So right away they get on and find the app for a screenwriting app and they just start. Would you recommend one over the other, like being one way, or do you think it's more of an in between?
As far as the approach to starting the process of writing.
Sure, like if there's someone that is just all like not even thinking about it that much, but just doing, but or if there's
Mhm.
someone that's thinking about it too and almost overthinking it.
Mhm.
Of course, we should try to be in the middle there, probably. But if you had to be one way or the other, which do you think it's better to err on?
Yeah, I appreciate the approach of just the passion approach, right? Yeah, let's just do this and see what happens. And I think that's kind of where the art and the science kind of meet, and that's where the phrase of, there's a method to the madness comes from, I think, is that it's just figuring it out, right? We do something so many times over and over, we eventually start to figure out how things work, right? So the same thing is true for anything you do. The more you do it, the more, and you're not consciously thinking, well, I'm learning from this, I'm learning from this. You're just learning as you go, right? And so, yeah, I would side with the person who's just has the passion to start, not really caring if it's written like a screenplay, or if it's not capitalized, or the punctuation's horrible, or it doesn't, it's not writing in complete sentences. Like, if you have the passion, desire to do it, just start. Just do it, right? And
Yeah.
that's ultimately what gets you to where you want to be in the end, is that you love what you do. Because if you don't love what you do, well, it's not going to get you very far, right? So,
You're gonna be learning all the right things, but you're just that engine's gonna die because you don't have the gas.
yeah, in my situation, there was practical considerations, involved in the decision. If I didn't have to worry about making money at all, and I lived in a mansion and all of my needs were met, sure, I just continued doing, and that's fine and that's realistic too at the same time. And my situation isn't the same as everyone's.
No, that's
But
so true.
but yeah, at the end of the day, if you don't want to do it, then do something you do want to do, Find something that you really want to do because, well, like the quote you always likes to use, right? The world needs more people who've come alive, right? Who have the passion.
Yeah. Yeah, it's such a I'm kind of dual-sided on this with this podcast of that I want to I don't I want to show people, especially young artists and stuff like that, give them advice, like coming from people who have done it maybe more than they have. But on the other side of that coin, I also want to show young people that there's no one way of doing things. Everyone's going to be different. And by us talking on this podcast, we're not saying that your way is what the truth is or the best way.
Sure. There's a lot of different approaches, right?
Gosh, there's just it's life in general is just all types of ways, all types of things. One person is their way is not going to be the next. So I think the best advice, like we've been saying, I don't want to flog a dead horse, but that is just do it. Like if you think you want to try it, do it because that passion is what's going to drive you. And
Mm.
uh, yeah, like in Garrett's case, like happens. It's not wrong to step away from those things too at times. Sometimes we have to give ourselves permission. Like, again, your way is not going to look the same as someone else's. I let myself take a step away from painting for a while because I had the birth of my son and life was just pretty crazy. I have, a full-time job. I have kids now. I'm not saying I'm not going back by any means. I hope to get back as soon as I can. But, letting yourself be okay with that. I don't have to look like Jackson Pollock, or I don't have to, and Garrett doesn't have to look like Stephen King or Taylor Sheridan or something like that. Anyway, I'm trying to get on a soapbox and I really just need to get it off, I think. This kind of is in line with something that I like to ask all of my guests. What really inspires you? And what is it about storytelling to you that's so inspiring and that you feel compelled?
Wow, you opened Pandora's box. This is a great question because I think at its core, its philosophical core, this is kind of what drives me or drove me. I think I didn't realize it at the time, but like when I stepped back, right, years after realizing, like, okay, what was it about story writing that inspired me? Or, why did I right? Because I talked a little bit about my past, about photography, and then how I feel like I made the connection with film and then to writing. But like, why, right? Like, what is it about it? And I think the conclusion that I've come to is that narrative stories are about making sense or meaning out of noise. So without stories, I think everything kind of collapses into subjectivity, right? So I like to use the example of like a detective in a murder investigation, right? It's an illustration, I guess. So with a detective, when looking at clues about a murder, all the random evidence looks like noise, right? It's just there's stuff all over. It doesn't really add up. But regardless if the detective pieces together those clues, there's an objective reality that something actually happened, right? So it's like A happened, then B happened leading up to the murder. And that's what I think is what would be considered a narrative. But the thing is that notice that it's objective, meaning whether or not we can understand or make sense of the points that lead up to, there are actual clues that exist, right? That spell out what happened leading up to the murder. So it's like one thing led to another that led to another led to the assailant murdering a person, leaving the scene of the crime, right? So there's something about the objectivity of stories that I think if our minds didn't work that way, we couldn't piece together anything towards a conclusive reality, right? I actually think that life would be meaningless if our minds didn't work the way they do. So I think that that's where story or narrative fits in as a tool, is it kind of informs us of the reality that we live in. So I guess coming back to that word objectivity or that concept is that without an objective reality outside of our own subjective opinions, there's no narrative. Narrative ceases to exist, right? So the whole point of a story is that We're trying to look at something through a particular lens and come out the other side with some sort of meaning.
Let me try to break this down a little bit and see if I'm understanding this correctly. So you're saying basically kind of like you're taking a look at something, things that are objective. So in other words, social constraints. We have gravity. There's
Sure.
and then you're taking all these physical, tangible, and objective things like that's a car, this is a person, man, woman, and you're constructing them into a narrative, into something that that connects with the viewer or with the reader, but objectively they're still there, but
Mm.
you're just showing them how they all connect. Is that something like it? I'm not sure if I'm or maybe I should say, can you give an example of what exactly you mean by objective things?
Sure. Well, like I kind of going back to that idea of the murder investigation, right? Is
Yeah.
we already have a context, and that's the key, right? Because if we don't have a context of a murder, we're not looking for anything specific, right? We don't even know. We might know that we're walking through a room where a murder happened and that there's evidence in the room that could lead to finding the killer, right? We would have no idea. Now, if we enter the scene and we know that a murder has happened, well, now we have a context built around what we're doing, right? Without that bigger
Mm.
context, there's nothing to look for. Does that make sense? We need that construct of an objective reality to be able to start making sense of it. So I think this is kind of like bleeds into what the author as a writer, what the author's intent is that I think narrative, like in its purest form, right? Again, in the context of writing, it's when a writer comes up with something they want to say and then sets out to say that or prove that through their story. How effective they are depends on their understanding of the craft and their ability to effectively utilize the tools to tell a coherent narrative that proves their point. So, for instance, one of your favorite movies is The Shawshank Redemption, right?
Sure. Yeah.
You use that as an example. Well, what's the movie really about? Well, it's about hope, right? So the story sets out to either prove we should keep hope or we should give up hope, right? So it does this by pitting these two points of view against each other. One of those views is played by Morgan Freeman named Red, right? And the other one's played by Tim Robbins, the character named Andy. Do you remember what Red says early on when he's sitting in front of the prison review board? You remember that scene?
No, it's been so many years. Yeah.
I have the quote here. He says, "Let me tell you something, my friend. Hope is a dangerous thing. Hope can drive a man insane." So, this embodies his point of view, where the crux of the narrative theme and focus is coming from. And the purpose of Andy, or the character played by Tim Robbins, from the perspective, if you kind of see Andy as like, a narrative cog or his function, is attesting that assumption. Is hope dangerous? Should we hope? Right? Because his point of view is the opposite. Right? Red doesn't really want to hope. He sees guys pour out their heart on the review board and just get thrown back in prison. Right? And Andy lives dangerously. He's one of those guys that he's different. He's different from all the other guys in Shawshank. Right?
Hmm.
So the meaning in a story comes from this juxtaposition of these two points of view. Again, in the context of or against the backdrop of the Shawshank Redemption, right? Where we're talking about that. One of those points of view is going to prove to be right. The other one's in the context of the story is going to prove to be wrong.
Sure.
Now, if both of those points of view prove to be right, so let's say Red is saying that hope's a dangerous thing, and Andy's character is the opposite. He's saying, no, we should hope. Well, how can those both be right? In philosophy, that's something called the law of non contradiction, which essentially just means contradictory claims can't be both true at the same time in the same sense. So, in layman's terms, it means the opposite of true is false. We all know that, just because we're humans, we understand how this works. But I've seen plenty of films that mistakenly do this, claiming both points of view of the story argues are correct, and it's up to the viewer to decide. And I'm not talking about choose your own adventure type stories or movies. And those are the ones where the ending hits like, I don't know, like a pat on the shoulder, right? Or a raindrop. These stories fail because I think the story never really understands what it wants to say. I think we've all seen movies like that. So, why The Shawshank Redemption is such a great movie, as an example, is because the author sets out with an intent to juxtapose those two points of view and out the other side, well, what happens? Red adjusts his point of view to Andy's.
Yeah, I think that's true for a lot of great films is that they sometimes the simplest ideas are the best in a way. Like coming out on the other end of the movie, you have a clear objective. This is what they were trying to get across. And I think a lot of times people try to make a good movie be too complicated. I think you can be complicated in the way, or at least layered in the way that you address the issue and how you resolve it. But
Mhm.
the resolution is when it's simple enough and clear, I think that's when a lot of the times those
Mm,
movies are the best.
mm.
Like like you're saying, like there has to be one clear winner in a way.
Yeah, because I mean, the author's point, and this is why story is meaningful, right? They're in the context of the story. We're not talking about the world. We're not talking about our lives. We're talking about the context of the story, meaning that bubble that the author has created. They're trying to tell us something given that specific context, right? And
Yeah.
so for their message to hit us, they need to understand how those parts work. And if both of those two points of view that we're seeing in the film clash and one comes out, the other side is the winner, so to speak, then you're conveying to the audience that this is the point of view you should have if you want to be successful in this particular thing, right? Given what the character's going through. So I think that's like going back to what we're talking about with certain movies, with having characters that we can identify with, right, who are going through similar things as we are, is because of that, is because we're getting to see something from a different point of view, but they're working on the same problems.
And I think that it's being addressed in a somewhat simplistic manner. Like, especially I'm thinking about dramas. You know, in an hour and a half, 2 hours worth of time, you can't convolute something too much. Real life isn't like that. And I think we want movies to be a lot like real life. And in a lot of ways, that's true. A lot of successful shows and movies have a lot of real elements to them. Like, life is not cut and dry necessarily. But I think at the same time, in order to be a successful film, because film is not real life, you're saying something. And I think you have to embrace that and really just try to say that the clearest and best way, creative way that you can.
Sure. Yeah. And I think the films that do that the best are the stories where the author clearly understood what it is that they wanted to say. Um, and sometimes and this is, I guess, from the point of view of someone who's actually in the middle of writing, and this probably happens all the time. You don't actually know what you want to say maybe right away, right? You have a big idea, you have something really good you want to write, and then through the drafts, through the carving away, right, of the actual writing is when you start to understand, oh, this is really about this. It's really about this issue, right? Or it's really about, right, we could apart from Stephen King's work in The Shawshank Redemption, right? Let's just say we're writing this screenplay, we could have this really cool prison movie with this really cool escape at the end as it's currently written, but not really know what it's about. You know what I mean? Not
Uh-huh.
really know that it's about, maybe it's not about hope. Maybe it's about something else entirely, but the story focuses specifically on this thing, whether that's a dangerous thing to have or we should, right? It's an argument for having hope despite the difficulties, despite what's going on. We should still have hope, right? And so that story
And
argues that very effectively.
yeah. And what's interesting too is that story could probably be told in any other type of setting too. Like it didn't have to be a prison necessarily. Although some of the imagery would be different and some of the things, and that was maybe the most effective for that. But I'm just saying, like a lot of these times, yeah, your message needs to probably be clear no matter what setting you're using to tell it.
Absolutely, yeah. I agree with that.
Interesting.
There are certain stories that are told over and over again because they have something that resonates, I think, especially with Western audiences. So, for instance, I'll say this and you'll go, oh, yeah, I know what you mean. So, for instance, the story of Avatar, right? The movie Avatar, it's the same story form as Dances with Wolves or Beauty and the Beast or The Last Samurai or Pocahontas, right? You see what I'm getting at? Is
Yeah.
that James Cameron, specifically, let's talk about Avatar for just a second. He smartly decided to frame his story against that type of a story form because it's such a universally used story form that gets the point across of a character who desperately needs perspective in his life. And I think why it resonates so much, right? Because he has to embody this other perspective. He has to become something that he's not, right? And so the same thing with those other stories that I mentioned, Dances with Wolves, The Last Samurai, Pocahontas, they're all about a character who thinks a very specific type of way, and has to change their point of view to someone else's, right? By the story's end. Also, another one that came to mind is the one with Edward Norton, where he's a Nazi. Do you remember the one I'm talking about? Generation X or something like that?
History X, right?
History X, something like that.
Something like that.
Right.
American has History X.
Yes,
Something
thank
like
you.
that.
That's
Sorry.
it. Yeah, that's the same story form as all those other
Mm.
ones. Now, I think the reason for that is because it's something that resonates with people. We all get what it's like to have a very specific point of view and then have to, or had our point of view changed. And so I think getting back to Avatar, I think why James Cameron made such a smart move in that is because it's a very safe story. You know, he can get into the stuff that he really wants to get into, which is he excels at excellent visuals, right? And these grandiose worlds and frame it against something that's tried and true. So I just
Yeah.
wanted to make a shout out to the connective tissue that we have in a lot of our stories.
Sure. Yeah. There's stuff like that in the hero's journey they talk about and different things like that. Yeah, there's different yeah, how many different stories can we tell? But it's also that in the combination of how many different ways can we say it too. And when you have just the right combination of both, I think, or at least an interesting way to say both, that's when it really clicks. Yeah, like we were talking about with Avatar.
Uh-huh.
All right. Well, I don't want to keep you too much more, but I did want to do a little bit of what is maybe you have a creative outlet now and maybe you don't. But even looking back at when you were writing more, what was something that helped to inspire you, like to help get you pumped about doing what you were doing? Was it a film? Was it music? Was it reading? What kind of inspires you?
Yeah, that's a tricky question. It definitely wasn't one specific thing, I wouldn't say.
Sure, sure.
I think it changed. I think it was honestly, I think life does in its own way, inspires.
Mm,
And what I mean by that is the ups and downs of life. The joy in eating an ice cream at a drive-through, right? Or having a really difficult family drama that you're working through, right? Honestly, I think those things gave me more inspiration than watching movies, although that did happen. I'm not saying that didn't, or listening to a good song or hearing music because as writers, we're constantly scraping our own lives, I think, for inspiration, right? That's our initial inspiration is our own lives. What do we have to work with, right? We can write about a character who's depressed or who's a drug addict because maybe we were, right? We can write about worlds that other people haven't seen because we've experienced those ourselves, right?
yeah.
Experiences that we've had. So I think that for a writer is kind of the best place to tap into is your own experience of life, right? And what is it about your perspective that's different from others? What have you seen? What have you experienced? So that's
Yeah.
what I really like to listen to.
So I guess so that being said, like practical wise, would you find yourself like you would be in the middle of something with family or yeah, you just had the great ideas, ice cream, would you all of a sudden be like, "Oh, this would be a good idea," or, "Oh, I could write this in this way." Like, would it be kinda like that? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. Yeah. Sometimes
Mm,
ideas just kind of when your mind's clear, right? You don't really
mhm.
have much going in there. You're just enjoying the moment with something simple. That's when sometimes inspiration would strike as far as an idea. Usually it doesn't
Yeah.
mean like, oh, I need to go start writing a draft or something like that. It was usually like, I have an idea and I need to write this in my phone for later. Or it could come from the really difficult.
Yeah. And do you think that happened more the more you practice writing and you were in it? Or do you think that just has always kind of happened to you?
No, I think it's for me, it was a learned habit or a learned skill set where it's getting used to being in tune with your emotions, with my emotions, because I think emotions play a lot into ideas sometimes.
Yeah.
So I think it's knowing yourself, listening to yourself, I guess I would say. So it's when you're going through stuff, whether it's good or bad, it's being able to spark inspiration from any of that stuff, right? Because I think all that stuff says something and it's finding out what it says. And so sometimes that wouldn't immediately come, right? Maybe it would be after some time that I had to internalize what happened, that the resolution or the idea would come.
Yeah.
It's really just getting good at, listening to yourself, listening to your thoughts, examining yourself. I think as artists, we all must examine ourselves a lot, you know, for the for the for
Yeah.
the for the better or the worse.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And out of that can come the beautiful things, hopefully, that we make.
Yeah, yeah,
And also some crap too, probably.
well, yeah. And again, not to beat a dead horse, but again, making those mistakes.
Yeah. Yeah. Not caring, just doing it. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
All right. Well, lastly, I know you're saying you're not practicing right now, but is there anything going on in your life right now that you are doing creatively or that you'd like to share?
Yeah, so I think it would be easy for me to write off myself because of the fact, and that was something that I struggled with a lot, I think, in the past, was right after deciding, that I wasn't going to continue, was I thought I was a failure. I thought that it was, worthless. What I've come to realize is that what I've learned from being a writer has the mindset and the skill set has come in handy in other ways. So I'm currently studying cybersecurity, and there's actually much need for someone who has good narrative skills. So, remember earlier when I was talking about how without a context, without an objective lens to look through, we're just looking at noise. Well, something that happens a lot in this industry is as a defensive security analyst, you'll be looking through logs of data, which is just information about, like, for instance, who logged into a web server or something like that, right? But you're looking at millions or thousands or millions pieces of evidence. And so all you see is noise, right? You don't have
Sure.
a objective view of what's going on. But when you're looking for the right things, all of those when you start looking for the right things, you start piecing together a narrative. You start piecing together a story of that something happened, something malicious happened, right? And so that's part of it. And then the other part is being able to cohesively tell a narrative of what happened, how it happened. And so those skills, right, that I spent years sharpening have actually come in handy already and will probably continue to come in handy in the future.
Hmm. That's very interesting. Yeah. You're taking it in a whole nother context now, a whole different scenario and world, and being able to use that storytelling. Wow. Hmm.
Yeah.
Very cool. Lastly, is there any how can if people want to, I don't know, do you have anywhere where people can read some of your work or can see what you're up to now or anything that you want to show them, like maybe your letterbox list or anything?
I don't have anything online for my old work. You might be able to Google my name and find something from the past that's been submitted to one of the festivals or something like that. But yeah, you could look for me on Letterboxd. My handle name is Amersga. It's spelled Amersga. And that has my lists on there, my film lists. And then I guess on LinkedIn, because now I'm trying to connect with other professionals who are in my industry. So if you want to connect, absolutely, I'll entertain that. And then one last thing I'd like to say before I leave is I love my wife, April. Thank you for supporting me through all those tough years of writing. And thank you for being by my side. And thank you to my daughter, Bexley, for just shining a lot of joy in my life. And love you both. So just wanted to mention them.
Yeah, without a families, who knows where we'd be, huh?
No, it's so true. You need people in your corner because pursuing art is not a neutral thing. It really isn't.
Yeah, for sure. All right. Well, thank you, sir, Mr. Garrett Amerson. I believe is how you pronounce your name.
Oh, yes, the French.
Yeah. That's originally what you are, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
No, Garrett and I love to be on the ridiculous side. So thank you, my friend, for doing this.
Yeah. No, I really appreciate you having me on, and I've enjoyed this podcast. It's been great to listen to on the car rides from place to place, and yeah, just keep doing it, man. Keep entertaining us with these awesome interviews.
Well, I hope so, sir. Thank you very much. And we will talk to you later.
Oh, for the Love of Art with Sam Bishop, produced by Sam Bishop. Theme music and incidental music by Arc Music. To find out more, go to sambishopworks.com. If you like what you heard today, please like and subscribe and share us. Thank you for joining us.